Good evening. It is 9:30 in the evening. We're both very tired. We had just observed the London auction at Sotheby's in March. But yet here we are, and we will talk about Willem de Kooning in this episode. Our reason for focusing on de Kooning is that I think in many respects he's a quite badly understood painter. He changed his style several times throughout his career, and it's harder to define his practice and his life as well than, say Jackson Pollock, who, you're not too far off by summarizing him as a simpleton, drunkard cowboy who, drips paint on a canvas and, died of alcoholism. You're actually quite close to Pollock's life by saying such a simple thing. But with de Kooning, he's not clearly American. He was born in Rotterdam, and he's not clearly an abstract painter in that many of his most famous works depict women. So I thought that it would be an opportune moment to look at his oeuvre and to see what he is really all about.
Yes. Well, de Kooning for me, I feel, it was actually interesting that you said that he is not so American for you, because to me, it always felt like he's the American guy. Like, I always found it quite fascinating that he's not actually American. He doesn't even speak English that well. And but yeah, I think de Kooning for me, it's someone who's like very important, and I know that. But I guess my perspective is that I've never really feel like I love de Kooning, and I don't feel the connection with the work, in a sense that you could say that I don't really get them, why they are so great.
Right.
And I hope that you can tell me more.
Sure. Well, I'll start with the biography. We've already touched that he was born in Rotterdam in 1904. As is, I guess, typical for an artist, his childhood was characterized by unrest. His father left the family, and so after school he did an apprenticeship as a commercial artist. So the kinds of artists who would do the window displays in department stores and so on. And his talent as a draughtsman was soon discovered. So from the age of 16, I believe, certainly very young, he attended the Art Academy in Rotterdam. But then in 1926, so at the age of 22, he snuck onto a ship and traveled to the United States, perhaps in the hope of finding success. I guess I would imagine in the 1920s, it was relatively shortly after the First World War. The Netherlands, Europe, I presume would not have felt like the prosperous place where things were happening.
Yeah, I guess it was the time with all the American dream and a lot of immigration to America anyway. So he was kind of one of them.
Yeah. And so in New York, he continued his occupation as a commercial artist, and only gradually through the influence of Archibald Gorky, so he met Gorky in New York, he eventually decided that he really wanted to become an artist. And at the time, so we're speaking of the 1930s in the US, there was not really a New York American art scene. You had some regionalist painters such as Hart Benton, perhaps, and perhaps most significantly, you had galleries such as Pierre Matisse who were showcasing the European artists, so Miro, Picasso, and so on. But there was a very important sense in which there was no significant art produced in America itself, at least from the perspective of the Western art historical canon. And so
so I guess the war really brought changes, no? The 30s with the Great Depression, and then we enter into the Second World War, and it was really after the Second World War where a lot of during the war as well, a lot of European, German, French artists, they all moved to, especially the surrealists, they all moved to America, and it really brought what was the most avant-garde stuff to America. And
that's true. However, it seems to me that the influence of the European and Parisian avant-garde was already very much felt in New York prior to the surrealists having arrived there.
I see.
But I think what the Second World War changed was that it gave America a greater sense of confidence on the world stage. They were no longer a far-flung subordinate country with a huge expanse in the West, but they were the most significant party in world politics, and certainly the wealthiest country after the war, and so there was a sense in which there was interest in finding an American voice. And Willem de Kooning wasn't the first person who comes to mind. He's Dutch. He came to America as an immigrant, and he very much looked to the Cubist painters, in particular Picasso and Miro were probably his main influences, aside from Gorky, who also immigrated from Eastern Europe. And so in the early 40s, Jackson Pollock was the first American artist to really leave a mark. He was born in Wyoming, and he embodied this kind of self-made simpleton brute. I mean, he wasn't a bright guy in some sense, and he was extremely bold, and in that way perhaps embodied the kind of ambition that America was conveying in many aspects, whether that be military, whether that be politics, and also art, of course.
Yeah,
and so
I guess he really had this sense of liberation and freedom. Like he had this strong intuition, and he just did whatever he wanted to do.
Yeah,
and that's what people wanted to see in the American art, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, he was a very innovative painter. His first critically very significant works, his black and white paintings from the late 1940s. He would use household paint because he was too poor, in black and white, just like Franz Klein. And he would do works that are inspired by a cubist rendering of space. And what he would try to do was to create compositions that are really expansive and blur the distinction between background and foreground. You have shapes interacting, and there's a certain kind of dynamism and almost like an attempt to break the flatness of the pictorial plane through the illusionistic quality, essentially, of different shapes interacting and overlapping amongst themselves. But he only really attracted attention for these works in the early 50s. I believe the Art Institute of Chicago bought his most significant work from that period, titled Excavation, in 1951, which is...
When did de Kooning had his first significant exhibition again?
Oh gosh, that's a good... 1948, but he failed to sell a single painting, so it was at Charles Egan Gallery. It was basically one of his mates from the pub, and several artists helped him set up the gallery, and he was a terrible businessman for all we know. He also failed to pay de Kooning. So, not a terribly good gallerist in some sense.
Yeah. But I mean, it was interesting. Like one other thing about the reason why de Kooning's success came later is also that he refused to have an exhibition before he felt like he could have an exhibition of himself that he's happy about. So he really put off an exhibition until 1948, no? At least that's why.
Also true. No, I mean, he struggled a lot with his work. He was extremely perfectionist. And so he was already quite notorious in the New York art world prior to his first exhibition, just because people had known him as the guy who is constantly painting and is, perhaps among the hardest working of painters, an extremely talented draughtsman, in part because of his education in Rotterdam, but someone who's not yet really reached the limelight.
Yeah.
And so I think what's interesting, so after these initial paintings that really play with the flatness of the pictorial plane, these abstract works, he decided to paint the female figure. And at the time this was strongly criticized by the leading advocate of abstract expressionism at the time, Clement Greenberg.
Yes, who actually liked his black and white paintings.
He really liked his black and white paintings, and he considered it somewhat reactionary, I would think, to return to the figure. It was his belief that there's a certain element of progression in painting, and that painting should leave behind the illusionistic quality of representation. I mean, you can't really represent the figure, not even through tricks such as cubism, because the picture plane in its very nature, it's a flat surface.
Yeah.
And so the women paintings, they are also cubist inspired. He typically paints women, and they're quite, I wouldn't say they're moving, but they seem to, I would be inclined to think that his works convey the concept of woman, because they don't display one particular woman. Her movements aren't stable. The proportions aren't stable. There's a certain instability in all of her movement. And the smile, it's kind of an intention. It's as if trying to capture several people all at once within a single image.
Yes.
And I think, the paintings are frankly ugly. I mean, they're not beautiful women that he depicts, but I think these works are quite important as a reaction to the highly dogmatic championing of, the flatness of the picture plane by Greenberg, which would, later lead on to Greenberg advocating color field abstractions such as Kenneth Noland and what have you. And I think they maybe also anticipate pop art, actually.
Yes. Well, we can talk more about the significance of the woman in a bit, but should we just finish off the biography first?
Sure. Well, so the women...
the women came in 1950?
55, around that time. And they actually turned out to be a success, even though Clement Greenberg strongly criticized his works. And so in the late 1950s, I believe his first show where he had success with these paintings was at Sydney Janis Gallery. And so this really gave him the stability to think bigger and to also really have a good life through his art. So moving forward 5 years, in the early 1960s, he acquires a big property in Springs in Long Island. So that's also where various abstract expressionists had ended up residing. So Jackson Pollock bought a house there. Conrad Marcarelli was de Kooning's neighbor.
But I guess in the background that the abstract expressionist artists, all of them really all took off in the late 1950s.
Yeah.
Especially after Pollock died, it was kind of this huge news that put all the other artists as well as Pollock's works in the center stage of the world scene.
No, absolutely. So obviously, aside from de Kooning, Franz Klein, had success around the time. Roscoe was
slightly later.
Slightly later, I would think, and so on. But I think there's also a lot of difference among these artists. I mean, in terms of the influences, I mean, Pollock is really a neo-surrealist, if you want to be, blunt in that. I think that there's this element of being very concerned with the subconscious ultimately, and it's like surrealistic automatic drawing. And Franz Klein, not that I am an expert, but it's gesture, and I feel with Roscoe there's something quite erratic and probably also very spiritual, and de Kooning wasn't like that. I think at foremost he understood himself as a draughtsman and was interested in the quality of paint and not in a too strong intellectual backbone to his work. And so the 60s come, and so he settled in Springs, traveled to Italy twice in the 1960s and in the late 1950s. And so the work from that period, he ends up painting more women in bright colors, often a bit disgusting, often showing genitals, and I'd say the quality of the brush, it's very reminiscent of Soutine. It's often very thick strokes, and it's messy. Sometimes he would stick newspaper on top, or you'd at least have the imprint of a newspaper on the painting. And these works were not well received. I think from the 1960s, pop art was really the big thing. So in 1962, you had that famous New Realist show at Sydney Janis, and then artists such as Andy Wall, Robert Rauschenberg, who were really in the limelight. So in the 1960s, he was considered somewhat outdated, but yet he survived, obviously with the benefit of much alcohol, and
many women.
So I've not really spoken about that much, but his love life was terribly tumultuous. So he was quite fearful of committing to women.
But he's committed to women in his art.
Yeah, the generic type of a woman, the concept of a woman, or women in general, rather than one woman in particular. I guess that's not too foreign to many many men. And so I'd say probably the 1960s and 1970s. I'm simplifying it quite significantly, but it's quite an interplay of abstraction and figuration, of showing women toward the point of almost abstraction, and really generously using paint. He would mix his oil paint with a particular kind of oil, such that it takes longer to dry, and it has almost like a kind of mayonnaise-like feel to it. And so he did works in this very abstract style until the late 1970s. And then in the 1980s, he completely switched. So by, I believe, 1979, there were first signs of dementia. He must have already been in his late 70s by then. And he suddenly started to paint extremely minimal and blank canvases characterized by elongated lines, and he would also scratch into the paint surface, and they're quite meditative works. So the majority of his works are actually from the late period when he was suffering from dementia, because he was far more I would think, energized and perhaps far less
Was he more
restrained.
relaxed?
More, I mean, I wouldn't say relaxed, but far less restrained. So in his best year, he would make up to 60 paintings, for instance.
Wow.
Whereas
Yeah.
there are some years where he may have only painted 3 paintings or what have you.
Yeah.
And so he stopped painting in 1992 because at some point his dementia had become so bad he no longer picked his colors. His studio assistants would give him colors. They'd pre-mix them. And so particularly the very late paintings, I think that you can hardly call them de Koonings because the colors aren't mixed by him, and sometimes his studio assistants would even project images with using a projector onto the canvas forms to give him like
Guidance.
a starting point, what to
Right.
start with. So so in 1992 he completely ceased painting because he was simply no longer really, I mean, he claimed that he no longer felt like painting, which in a way seems to suggest that he's quite out of touch with himself because it seems to contravene all what his life has really been about.
Yeah. Yes. So that is the end of de Kooning's painting life.
Yeah. And so, having canvassed his life, I think the main 3 bodies of work, or 4 bodies of work, if you want to simplify, are, I'd say, the 1940s black and white paintings, the 1950s women, and then the 1960s and 70s generous depictions of women and also abstract works abstract works that are suggestions of women. And then finally, the quite minimal paintings from the 1980s. And so, what's the market like? I mean, you don't really see a lot of de Kooning paintings these days, certainly not in London or Europe.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what we see the most is still the later works. I guess there is plenty of them, first of all, and also there are probably less as in the. I guess the earlier ones are mostly in the museum as well, so less of them's in the market, and.
Yeah, that's true. I think there's only one woman painting from the 1950s that is left in private hands, for instance, and so. I'd say 10 years ago, it would have probably been among the most valuable post-war paintings out there. I think I forgot the numbers, but I think one changed hands for some price in excess of $100 million. But I would probably be inclined to think that it's less valuable now, just because people associate less with the women, and maybe also the status of America has changed in the world. Maybe a painting that at its core captures the transition between abstract expressionism and pop art in American art in particular is no longer as significant to collectors now as it may have been 20 years ago. I'm sure you can say the same thing about Jasper John's American flag paintings. America is just not really that celebrated as a notion, as a country, as it used to be.
But I think the market is mainly the American market anyway. So as long as the Americans still love them and the Americans' economy is still good, I think they'll still be fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perhaps. I mean, I guess with certain masterpieces, it's so hard to really price them because you don't have any comparisons to draw on.
Exactly.
How do you value the Mona Lisa? I mean, in fact, I read up about insurance valuations, like how would you insure such a painting? And it turns out, rather interestingly, that paintings such as the Mona Lisa, they are not insured, and the reason is that if it gets damaged or destroyed, it's a loss to the state. But the state is such a big entity that they're able to take the risk, I guess.
Yeah.
So it's not like a private individual who wants to I mean, obviously the state has every interest to protect the work. Uh,
Yeah, it's a cultural asset.
it's a cultural asset, but at the end, yeah, it doesn't owe it to anyone or what have you. So it's only, you would only insure a painting such as the Mona Lisa if it were to travel to an exhibition.
Which is not going to
rarely
happen.
does. Yeah, I think like maybe 50 years ago or whenever it had a show in the US, it was insured at $1 billion, which in a way is just a quite nominal number because it's impossible to price it. But yeah, you're right. So what you see the most is his late work, and I think I'm not really that fond of the late works. I mean, frankly, with many of them, he was suffering from dementia, and so they're only really half-boiled de Koonings, if you will.
Well, so what do you think is the real deal de Kooning? Like, what do you find so interesting? Because I obviously feel that you like de Kooning a lot more than me.
Well, I think what I like about him fundamentally, first of all, is that he is an artist who evades categorization to a certain extent. I mean, sure, you might call him an Abex painter, but really he's a lot more than that.
But like all Abex painters are not really Abex painters.
Well, I mean, yes, they are. I mean, most of them kind of died by 1960, so and they pursued a wholly abstract body of work. I mean, I think from all of the big names, de Kooning is the only one who would return to the figure, and so I think he's more in touch also with the European art historical narrative. But I wouldn't say I have a theory to back up which works I like best, but I think that they're more within the narrative of European painting than any of the other artists. I think he's a really talented draughtsman. I mean, often the way he draws his lines, it looks quite sloppy, but there's a lot of precision in it. I think it's often, actually throughout his entire it feels like hooks, like a curve with a certain velocity, and then it goes back quickly, and it has a very strong dynamism, which I think is probably quite hard to try yourself, and it requires a great deal of control. But yeah, I'd say probably my favorite works are those from the early 1960s, characterized by very rough brush strokes, by naked women that kind of bleed into abstraction. The paintings remind me of Soutine, and I really love Soutine. I think that there's just something quite rich about these works, because they leave a lot open. Is it a landscape? Is it a figure we're looking at? I just find that quite riveting.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, what he says about painting is that, what was the famous quote? Like, oil is for painting flesh. So you're really supposed to paint flesh rather than something that is totally, like, abstract, and painting is just painting.
Yeah. No, I think I like that it's...
Yeah, I guess you do definitely see that quality in his work. This sort of layered and... I don't know. Yes. Like you mentioned before, you talked about the special solvents that he would use in his 60s works to make make the paint that is more viscous, I would say.
Yeah.
And it seems to be what he's used has always been of great interest to people as well. There's critics that's mentioned that he would use these cooking oils, like safflower cooking oils, to make them more viscous. And then later on in the 90s, there was like these rumors saying that he also used mayonnaise in as his solvent.
Oh, that's funny.
Which, like, people just creating legends now.
Yeah. I wonder how these works age. I mean, I've been told was particularly the work from the 70s, late 60s, where he used what's the name of that oil?
Safflower oil.
Safflower oil. I would imagine it's a kind of oil that dries more slowly, because one of the things de Kooning really liked while working on painting is to keep the paint wet and to be able to remodel it constantly. So he would also often put newspaper on top of a painting to have the paint dry more slowly. And I would imagine you will probably have a lot of condition issues with crack forming and so on.
Yeah, I think that's one of the point that's made in this book that's basically focused on his materials and his techniques. That people they suspect that the reason for these condition issues of those works is probably because that he used safflower oil.
Yeah, interesting. So probably if you want to have a de Kooning that doesn't deteriorate in condition, you should either buy a late one or get your hands on a really early one if you can, but you won't.
Yes.
Okay.
Well.
Interesting. Okay, Shuchi, what's your favorite work? I mean, I like the 1960s because, frankly, these works are perhaps a bit ugly and they leave a lot of things open, and you see a lot of influences simultaneously. What do you like best?
Well, as I've said before, I don't feel like I love de Kooning that much, so I'm going with the cliche. I think my favorite is the Woman One from 1950 to 1952.
Okay.
Well, first of all, I really like her lips. They're quite funny. But apart from that, I think I didn't really get what he was going for at the beginning when I first saw this painting. I mean, I understand that he was trying to capture this figure of the American girl, like that's on like posters and things, that has this peculiar smile, and trying to portray a version of a woman who I guess is how he perceived. But I read an interesting text that has really made a connection to his Dutch past. He says that he's actually really loves Bruegel's prints and also Bosch's paintings. And for one, that he's definitely seen all of those when he was in the academy in Rotterdam and also back home. And this connection, I feel like, actually really inspired me to look at the woman in a different way. Because I guess what was really curious in Bruegel's print for him was those tiny peculiar figures that sort of represents was it like greed, or represents all of these 7 deadly sins. And they all look a bit they're kind of human figures, but they have, for example, if you are greed, then you maybe have a really big mouth to show that you eat a lot and you have a lot of appetite. If you are the lazy one, then maybe you have just have a really sloppy body and kind of just lay on the ground in this kind of iconic position that exactly shows that I am laziness. I am a representation of laziness. I think there's this emblematic way of visualizing concepts and sins that was the usual way of representing things in the 17th century. And I feel like that way of looking kind of inspired me to see these women in that concept, is that these women are kind of emblematic visual representations of a type of woman in his head.
Yeah.
Like her body is not just like grotesque, or like the way that Picasso's done it. It's not like a distortion of space or because I feel like Picasso is also he's very personal, like he's very individualistic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like it's always about his relationship with a woman.
Goes beyond that.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it doesn't look like any of the women
exactly.
de Kooning dated.
It's not just the look, it's not like his relationship with the woman he's dated. Because Picasso's work is always like, I'm arguing with this woman, and that's why I'm going to paint her really ugly. Or like, I love this woman right now, so I'm going to paint her really pretty. But this one is, Yes, I feel like the way the body is represented, and also including how her legs are placed, and how like the eyes are really exaggerated, and the lips and the breasts. So these are the things that's exaggerated. The upper body is exaggerated, whereas the lower body is kind of much smaller. Like all of these forms, perhaps they are speaking of some sort of an idea that he has of what woman is
in America. So that's,
I mean, I can't really grasp what exactly it is, but it's perhaps like strength, or I don't know what the big breast really represents, but there's something that, yeah.
Yeah, I can see that. Ambition, maybe also showing a certain face in society. I mean, I think the grin is quite grotesque, because it's smiling, it's showing the teeth as you might expect in an advertisement commercial.
Yes.
But it also feels quite put on, and it doesn't seem like you get to connect to that woman, or any woman for that matter, on a quite interpersonal level.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And I think he said that on a woman's face, what he sees is the mouth. Like the mouth is the most obvious thing for him.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, I feel like there's something very emblematic to that.
Yeah. So why don't you like de Kooning?
Well, I feel that I never felt a connection to it. That's my first thought. But then on second thought, I actually realized that perhaps it's because I saw de Kooning at a time when I've already seen a lot of other things that's been influenced by de Kooning. Like all of these like young artists with this like abstract expressionist kind of style, and then everyone has a sort of different mannerism of like all of these, like Cecily Brown or something, all of these like abstract and slash figuration paintings.
Yeah,
I feel like I've seen like also what's the artist in Victoria Mural right now, the
Doron
Landberg, and like Adrian Gagny, like just everyone who's influenced by de Kooning and doing all of this abstract slash figuration things. And then after you've seen all that, then I reached de Kooning.
Well, in between you probably still have like the 1980s neo-expressionist painters.
Yeah, also
Julian
including
Schnabel
all of that.
And what have you.
Exactly. I feel like I've reached de Kooning a bit later than I've seen those works. So then now I see de Kooning, and then I feel it just doesn't feel as striking and exciting as what people probably felt when they first saw de Kooning as the first guy who's done it.
Yeah.
And I guess perhaps there is something that is, it's not that everyone can be de Kooning, but it's that there is something in it that's quite not easy to copy, but like you can take on from it. Yes, adopt from it a lot.
I think so. I mean, I think there's also a sense in which you can take things from his work without copying him. Like you can't really take from Jackson Pollock that much. Like either you do drip paintings or you don't. And if you do drip paintings, then you're copying
Jackson Pollock
in a one-on-one way. And if you don't, well, then you're not really engaging with him. So I think there's a sense in which someone like Pollock, he's not an I mean, I hate the word artist, but he's not an artist in that it doesn't really expand your toolkit as much as say someone such as de Kooning.
Yes, that's true. But I guess, but the other side of the story is that I just don't feel as excited about it when I see it, even though my brain understands.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, it's not a very intimate art. I mean, I don't emotionally connect with it on a deep level. I think it's I think it's a fantastic and very ambitious exploration of painting. But I get from what you're saying, the feeling, why should I care? Why? And it's perhaps something harder to relate to than perhaps many other artists.
Yes. Exactly. Well, thank you for listening, and that's it for today. And our next podcast will be on Robert Rauschenberg.